Ek het so 'n bietjie gehoor daarvan.
Yeah, this could be exciting as an energy resource to South Africa.
What is fracking?
Hydraulic fracturing
Process that is
was...
It started in 2011 when I stumbled across the fracking term in the newspaper. Had no idea what it was about, did some research, realized it was quite a controversial topic, the plan for gas extraction in the Karoo, the area where I grew up as a child, until I was 6 and was sent to boarding school. I think I was immediately frustrated by the lack of information around the topic and the fact that the debate had spiraled out of control because people were poorly informed, and I believed making false conclusions or sort of jumping to sides, either pro or against, without actually having done the research. So I decided to do some after-hours research for myself to see where I stood with this, and realized that the work that I was doing hadn't been done before. And before I knew it, I was sitting on top of a wealth of information that the general public isn't aware of.
Some people might argue that because of your relationship with the Karoo, living there, growing up there as a child, that you have a vested interest and a biased view.
Mm-hmm. I would make that argument as well. In fact, when I started this film, when I started all the research, I was incredibly optimistic about shale gas, and quite controversial, in the Karoo. If I'd go home, for Christmas holidays, I wasn't a very popular person at the dinner table because I believed that shale gas really could, if it was done properly, be the panacea for all the issues that we're trying to deal with in South Africa, the enormous unemployment rate and the poverty in the Karoo. So I was incredibly optimistic when I first started this, and it was only until I went to the United States to cross-check my information that I realized that the research that I'd been doing was poorly informed, and devastatingly so. The information available outside the United States is not sufficient to be able to take an informed opinion.
Am I to read now that what you started off in believing in, you no longer believe in?
I think it's more complex than that. I do see real pros for shale gas extraction in terms of on paper. I've yet to see those being executed safely in a manner in which the extractive industry is justified. But yes, I'm certainly less optimistic about the fracking industry now, having done more research, having been to ground zero, having done international consultation, over 400 interviews. Yes, less optimistic about the industry, but I say that I feel like now confidently I can make that statement because I've done the research.
It sounds to me like you're very anti the large oil corporations as opposed to the actual fracking principle.
Ultimately, I think it's a very fine nexus. We cannot be naive to the fact that we're sitting globally in economic trying times and energy trying times. We have an expanding global population that we need to provide energy to, and South Africa is a microcosm of that issue. But we're also at the same time depleting finite natural resources to address the aforementioned concerns. So we're sitting between the economy and the environment and trying to understand where we can push the one further off the chart. And to answer your question, it's definitely the bigger picture thing. I'm focusing a lot now on the climate change aspect, in which we need to act very soon, within the next 10 to 15 years, to avoid catastrophic impacts of runaway climate change. And we're entering, running out of energy options and being under economic pressure. We're entering the era of extreme energy, where energy will continue to flow, but at the cost that we can't yet imagine. That's not just economic, that's social, environmental. And fracking is one of those means. It's deep sea drilling, it's the tar sands in Canada. And the question is, are these short-term solutions? Are they going to help us right now? Or is it just a temporary fix until we figure out what the long-term solution should be? And that's a thinking problem, that's a philosophy problem.
Now, we all know that Africa is one of the drought centres of the world, and certain parts of Africa have been in drought for many, many years. America today is experiencing enormous drought conditions, which drives the cost of food up and so on. If we contaminate our water in the Karoo, and we are short of water in South Africa already in certain areas, is it your fear that we're placing ourselves in another danger to relieve one
Yeah, that's absolutely it. And I'm grateful that you're taking that bigger picture perspective. That's where I am now. I think when I started this was more about understanding cement casing diameters and chemicals and the rate of depletion for a well and what caused which health impact. But right now it is piecing together, connecting those dots, looking at the water crisis, looking at the energy crisis and the economic crisis, seeking solutions to those, and then evaluating whether or not fracking or shale gas extraction is the answer to that. And as far as water goes, it is certainly, one of the big issues or the big concerns that comes with fracking. It uses an incredible amount of water to frack a well, and that's fresh water. That water is permanently removed from the water cycle. You will be told by companies that it will be recycled. Again, a lot of this debate comes down to semantics. When you and I say recycle, we assume that to mean the water being returned to its original condition. That's not the case. We don't get all the water back. It can never be rehabilitated. So you're losing all of that water every time you frack. The process itself is threatening existing water supplies. So everywhere you go on the fracking sort of cradle of life, if you look at it in the entire process, there are so many opportunities to really contaminate, threaten or deplete water resources.
Aren't we paying the price of a kind of fracking with the mining industry today where water is contaminated?
Certainly. I think that is definitely something that you can't not bring into the perspective in the South African debate. I mean, if we're going to look at what our previous experience was like with mining in South Africa, you can only look at the acid mine drainage in the north of the country. And we haven't done too well. And it's something that the public doesn't really know, and I'm hoping to bring more of those statistics out in the peripheries of my work. But we haven't done well. We have an enormous water crisis in the north. The Karoo is running out of water. We have the impacts of changing weather patterns, and everyone always jumps about whether or not climate change is real. That debate aside, we're running out of water.
From a layman's point of view, I think the question that one asks oneself is, how much chemical is pumped through there? And I think that's where the fear lies, isn't it? Not so much the drilling, it's the chemicals that are induced into the earth to be able to frack. What kind of chemicals are we talking about?
Well, that's, spot on. That's also another one of the hot points in the fracking debate. An enormous amount of chemicals are used per frack job. Companies will tell you that it's only 1% of the fracking fluid, but when you're having 26 million litres of water, 1% is a fair amount of chemicals that you're using. It varies. It's all drilling additives, it's anti-corrosion additives, it's a whole bunch of complex and a lot of them toxic chemicals that are needed to aid the drilling process. But what a lot of people are not really realizing, and this is coming to the bigger picture, is that it's not only the chemicals you're putting down, it's what you're finding, the natural occurring elements in the shale layer itself. Incredibly high levels of salts, radioactive elements, and brine waters that come up with the produced water. And now, I mean, researchers are finding that it's not just the chemicals you're putting down and what's resident, it's the trifactor when those two combine. And one of the most recent chemicals that we're working with now is 4-nitroquinoline-1 oxide, 4-NQO, which is one of the most carcinogenic compounds known to man, and that wasn't in the chemical additive list, and nor was it resident in the shale. It's something that just came up, and now we have to deal with it. And when I say we, it's the independent regulatory agency who's trying to understand what this industry is about, but no one has ever briefed us. And we're having to do it on the go rather than sit and think about all the issues first.
I sit and look at the scales of justice here, not in a legal sense, but in a balanced sense of, if we don't do it, what do we suffer? And if we do it, what do we suffer? Mm-hmm. Is there a meeting point? Is there a solving, or is there going to be this balance that we're going to kill ourselves one way or the other?
It's an interesting question, and I think it also ties back into your original question of, the fact that I was raised in the Karoo perhaps being the impetus behind this film. And it really isn't. It's something that I'm deeply committed to the issues that face South Africa in all my other work and my projects, and I really want to commit all my work and time to helping address the socioeconomic disparities that we face. But to answer your question, yes, South Africa and the world indeed is at a crossroads right now. It's deciding how we're going to go forward in terms of a radical tactical shift in how we're doing things. It's not a matter of we're going to do fracking or we're going to do deep sea drilling. It's going, is this the best solution for the next 100 to 500 years? Because right now we're scrambling to do damage control for the existing economic and energy problems. And I believe that fracking is a symptom of that thinking. And I also believe that it's not rational, or no, rational could get me into trouble, but I don't think it's there hasn't been a lot of public consultation or independent consultation in these decisions. You're starting to see a lot of government and industry talking about these things, and a lack of public or independent feedback. And that's only fair if this is for the national energy strategy, of which I, as a citizen in a democratic South Africa, am able to participate in. But that hasn't been the case. And so you're starting to see a scenario where I believe in marginalized communities, from South Africa to Nigeria to Canada, companies capitalizing on the socioeconomic status or vulnerabilities in those communities. We're going to bring you jobs, we're going to bring you energy. In Poland, we're going to get you off the dependency on Russia. In South Africa, it's to ease the enormous disparities we have from the past. In America, it's to get off foreign oil dependency. So there's always these incredible sales pitches that are presented. But the challenge is in unpacking those and seeing whether they are true and whether they are long-term. I don't believe that's the case in most of them so far.
Who paid for all this, and can you recover the money for having done such a thing?
The whole project was really so unexpected. I never thought this was going to be an international feature film with platforms across the world and an existing audience already begging for the release of the film. So it caught me completely off guard. I've been hell-bent on integrity from day one. I think one of the biggest problems in any kind of environment or energy discussion is who's funding who and how is that impacting their findings. And so from day one, I've refused any funding from anyone somehow affiliated or with a vested interest in the fracking debate. So that's from environmental groups to energy companies. So the project's been entirely self-funded by myself, and with the amazing support of CTU Studios in Cape Town, which has made it obviously incredibly challenging, but I think it's something that we had to do to maintain the value of the research and the investigation. And I hope this is also, I hope the film is appreciated on those grounds. I went to the United States believing that shale gas really was a panacea for the issues that the world's facing. And I was horribly disappointed. So I've met with families from Colorado, Texas, across to West Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, up to New Brunswick, Canada, across the UK, spoken to Australia, countries in Europe and South America, spent months in the Karoo speaking to communities, and the value of what I found and the value of the voices that I wish to give a public platform far outweighs of those concerns. This film isn't about me, it's not about what I think. I'm a filmmaker, I'm 24 years old. I am not a petrochemical engineer, I am not an oil company, I don't have any history in this kind of industry. What I seek to do is go to the various stakeholders, be that a company or be that someone who has cancer after being exposed to the chemicals that were used in fracking, and make their voices known, because up until now I don't believe there has been fair exposure in this debate. And so the debate in South Africa and internationally has failed us, and governments, I believe, are making poorly informed decisions and a lack of public consultation. So I think it goes down to the very basic democratic processes that haven't been followed. And for me, that's completely unacceptable, just as someone that's living in a democratic society.